let's have a march. And it probably sparked off like that.
What do you think the people of Jarrow think about the march now?
I've tried to answer, well, I've asked a lot of people about that and I've heard a lot of comments about it. I think sometimes embarrassment, sometimes pride. It's what we're most famous for now.
Why should they be embarrassed?
Well, let's look back into history. Let's think about what Jarrow's famous for. Firstly, Bede, the Venerable Bede, a scholar, a worldwide known scholar. He wrote books, he brought the ecclesiastical teachings, he wrote the history of the English church and people who translated the Bible into English. Then you probably have a long period of not much happening after that, but it was always known as a sacred ground for Bede. Then you have Jobling, the last man to be publicly gibbeted in this way in Britain.
Whose
in an iron
claim was?
cage. Well, he was hanged, gibbeted for murder, a murder which he didn't actually commit, but it was during the strike of 1832.
That was the miners' strike.
The miners' strike, and it was the formation of the Miners' Union by Tommy Hepburn, a local miner. It was a famous case, it became national. Then you have the shipyard, which was a very great thing to be well known for. The greatest ships in the world were built here. But we're known more for the march than we are for the ships, than we are for William Jobling, the last public gibbeting, than we are for Bede, the Venerable Bede, the Jarrow March.
I mean, it was quite impressive because they had a bloke with a mouth organ at the front. You could hardly hear the mouth organ because they were singing, and certainly at the periods we went following the march and got in front of it occasionally and then stood again to see it come in till it got into Barnsley. And where there were people congregated to watch them, they were singing and they were cheered by people. It was an area which Barnsley itself, around that area, was, you know, fairly... There was very little hostility there to the march.
And when the march was decided upon, it was an all-party march. In no sense of the word was it either Labour or Conservative.
And, you know, this area in particular, there's a whole history. There was a women's march from here. It was a terrific event that people don't mention much about. And Jarrow March at that time was seen as one of that kind of event. It wasn't seen in its isolation as it tends to get seen now. I think the reason why the Jarrow March has, if you like, become part of history was that it was official. The council backed it. The Labour Party were involved in it, apart from some elements. And it had a sort of, it's the wrong word because it tends to denigrate it a bit. It had a sort of credibility that other unemployed marchers weren't getting. They were the communists, they were the rabble, they were the work shies.
There was Tories, there was Liberals, there was Socialists. In fact, the Labour Party disowned it at the beginning. And it gathered momentum as it went along. There was, I mean, you have to remember at that time, there was marches from small towns from all over the country. But Jarrow was the best organised, the best disciplined. And there was a real, it wasn't party political, and there was a real gut feeling. If you can think of 200 men, working men with caps and their ground sheet over their chest like a bandolier, carrying 3 banners silently, well disciplined, and that visual appearance of seeing that pass, it can frighten you to think that that's happened. I mean, these people were the salt of the earth.
When we arrived at London, the last stages was Hendon, and we set out from Hendon on that Saturday morning in pouring rain, and the whole way, right down the Edgware Road, down to the Marble Arch, and ultimately to Leicester Square, where we all gathered for a meal in Peter's kitchens. We were soaked to the skin, but I've never seen any men behave with such courage and such discipline.
The ironic thing about it was that after marching 300 miles and arriving back in Jarrow, they got back to be told that their dole had been stopped because they weren't available for work.
They set a model for all forms of protest against economic distress or unemployment or anything you like.
It was a natural response to a situation. That's why it was a success. It was a success as a non-violent protest march. That's why even today you cannot recapture that, because the people who tried to create the Jarrow March they're doing it for political reasons. Yeah. There's an ulterior motive behind it, but there wasn't then.
I think the real achievement of the Jarrow March was that it showed that if you could sink all your party differences, if you could concentrate upon the real history of the interests of the town, you could add a page to history that could never be removed.
How do you think the recent People's March for a Job compared to the original Jarrow March?
Well, I think it's difficult to make comparisons. You see, at the time the Jarrow March was on, now everybody thinks about the Jarrow March and sees that as a one-off thing in those days. But at the actual time the Jarrow March was on, in that period, there were a number of unemployed marches.
I don't think the People's March achieved what the Jarrow March did because there wasn't enough behind it, there wasn't enough power behind it. I think it was powerful in different respects to what the Jarrow March was, because the Jarrow March was people from all walks of life. It was Labour, Liberal, Socialists, Conservatives, a couple of Communists. It was like the whole community was on the march. The whole town had turned against the government and what they were doing to them. I'm not putting the People's March for Jobs down. I think it was quite right what they've done. It just didn't come across like the Jarrow March did, because people have changed, people's attitudes have changed, and sort of the media coverage put it across as like a left-wing, communist infiltrated agitators, students and things, and it didn't have the same impact as what the Jarrow March did. It didn't carry it off.
It's sadism, a government policy of sadism. They love to see other people suffer.
Just love to show how determined we are. It makes me sick.
It's because it's got to be up to us to fight back, isn't it? Everybody together.
Well, it looks that way because if a politician, so-called politician, has got no alternative, then he shouldn't be in bloody politics.
I'm fed up of the words of sympathy and rhetoric and things. We want action now. We have to get really together.
Here they come, the marchers come now, and I'm sure we'll watch it. Once again, 3 cheers for the marchers. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hooray! 3 cheers for the destruction of Maggie's government. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hooray! This march is one of the great marches in British history. They've had comparisons with Jarrow, and that's perfectly right. They've had comparisons with some of the other great occasions when the British people have risen in protest against mass injustice, whether it's Peterloo or Tolpuddle and the rest. Well, the People's March for Jobs of 1981 is telling the people of this country, telling the government of this country that we truly regard mass unemployment as intolerable, and we propose to shake it off our backs and to take this government off our backs in the process.
One thing has gone through my mind as we've marched along and received such a wonderful welcome from all those who stood on the pavements as we've marched by. It is a simple message. They can't ignore us now.
really, Jarrow failed. You know, as somebody once said, sometimes it's better to be the vanquished than the victor. Well, it's a bit of a situation kind of like that, you know. The town didn't get much, but didn't get the old shipyard back. It didn't get the good old days back, you know, when they were making money and it was booming. That was gone forever. But what it did, in its decline, it brought that attention to the nation, and it perpetuated after the war. It pushed forward the welfare state and the health service that we have today. I mean, I think that was a fundamental step forward for this nation and for the world even, if you think of it. No, that's what the Jarrow March was instrumental. It made people think about that.
I think we've said something, you know. I think we've been successful in my eyes because me personally, I've had a chance to say something. I've put things on vinyl, and people have listened to us, and I feel I have done something in life. So I think it was all worthwhile.
She gave them a smile as she wished them all well, as she waved them